Hello Internet, and welcome to the Collective Arcana. We are a channel all about tabletop gaming and focused specifically on Pathfinder 2nd Edition, but that's not the game we're going to be talking about today, technically. We're actually going to be talking about Starfinder 2nd Edition, which is sort of, kind of the same because they are cross-compatible. The meta is a different video. The point is we're going to be covering the tech playtest today for the Technomancer and Mechanic classes for Starfinder 2nd Edition. Starfinder 2nd Edition is about to launch in, I think, August around Gen Con, so it's right upon us. And while we didn't cover the original playtest, the full playtest for 2nd Edition Starfinder, we have been playing it in our games at our tables and having a wonderful time. It's been really fun to play with the different genres that it offers. More on that when we cover the Galaxy Guide later. We just really been enjoying it. All the classes have been super fun, hiccups here and there, things that obviously are the point of the playtest, give some feedback on things we'd like to see adjusted or changed. And that's what we're doing here today with these new classes. These classes are going to be coming in the Tech Core, I think is the name of the book. I don't know that I have a hard release date for it. If we do, we'll put it in the description. But it is coming next year, 2026. Don't worry, there's still Starfinder Core, GM Core, and Alien Core, I think is what they're calling it. Not Alien Archive, Alien Core, which is going to be their version of the bestiary. And all that's coming this year, as well as, like I said, we already had the Galaxy Guide, kind of a weird soft launch of Starfinder 2nd Edition, but some very cool stuff in there that we're definitely going to talk about in another video. So as I said, we got two classes this time, and we're going to start by talking about the Mechanic. It is an int key ability, 8 HP, pseudo sort of skill monkey class, not quite. About as much of a skill monkey as maybe the Swashbuckler is thereabouts. They basically are very good at technology, and they specialize in an AI that is connected directly to their brain called an exocortex, which they use to remotely control either a mobile drone, a stationary turret, or small smart explosives that they can sort of deploy. The drone mostly follows the animal companion progression with just enough differences to be interesting and very confusing. The turret is, we'll get to it. The turret is much more of a sort of deployable terrain piece that can, depending on how you upgrade it, just act as, mobile artillery, but also, well, not mobile, it's stationary once you deploy it, but you can move it around, but also as potential cover and like a little rallying point as well. As I said, the drone is a little confusing. It's already had to have an errata because of the wording and the setup. It seems like there was one draft of it that sort of got changed and not all of the feats and everything got upgraded. It could still use another pass, as some feats still don't really work. They have themselves. I think there's still one that still has itself as a prerequisite. You can eyeball it and figure it out. It's not unplayable, but it would be nice to know exactly what it looks like so that we can give better feedback on the progression of it, because it is very expensive to maintain with feats. If you really want to go hard on that drone, there are enough feats that's all you have to invest in, if that's what you want to do. But it also sort of feels like if you are playing the drone, you have to invest all your feats. A lot of it doesn't feel optional. I think one of my players was looking at it and said he felt like there's maybe 2 or 3 feats at most that he could devote to anything besides upgrading that drone. Because if you've played with animal companions in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, they are very hit or miss. They don't really fill a solid offensive role. At least as much as you might like. They can be very squishy depending on which build you have. There's a lot to be said about it. Probably could do a video on that as well. But the point is that there's enough tools and upgrades to this to keep it looking very attractive to use. However, that is such a huge chunk of your build. And not only that, but both the drone and the turret require you to invest in weapon upgrades for the weapons. I think that there are some, sort of freebies with it in terms of the modifications you can do. But at the end of the day, you are maintaining this separate weapon. And if you also want to use your own weapon, for those off actions where you're just taking pot shots yourself, it is a martial chassis. It can do that. It gets to master weapon proficiency itself. But anybody who's tried to maintain, both a ranged and a melee weapon or dual wielding or things like that, anytime somebody's had to maintain two weapons with progression, that can get pretty hard to do. And, it becomes a question of what's the best way to spend that? When we see final prices and things like that, and the final version of this class, maybe that won't be as big of a deal. But right now, the heavy feat investment and the heavy gold or credit cost for Starfinder are both worth noting. The mine subclass notably doesn't really have this problem. They get sort of free mines, sort of like, not quite like an alchemist, but similar enough. You're not really worried generally about running out of them. But it does have a different problem in that it kind of feels weird that that's what you're using your AI brain for, is throwing out mines and explosives. It doesn't not work, it doesn't not make sense, but it does feel like, compared to the turret and the drone, it feels kind of like an odd thing out. I would maybe like a mech suit subclass, although then that might be getting too close to the inventor, and we'll kind of talk about that comparison in a minute. But it does kind of feel like maybe that was intentionally left off because of that. As I alluded to, it stands very much on its own. I was expecting it to cover a lot of ground with the inventor, and it really doesn't. They're both intelligence-based marshals with, tech flavor and things, but the actual gameplay loop feels very different. The inventor is a much more straightforward class, despite how weird and fiddly some of its parts are. It's really all about turning on that overdrive and then using your unstable actions to do AoEs, supports, meta strikes, things like that. But it really is all revolving around turning on that overdrive and just sort of being a nerd rage barbarian. Versus the mechanic, who feels very agile sort of in how it plays. There's much more moment-to-moment decision-making, having the ability to upgrade equipment and things like that to modify your thing on the fly, versus the inventor, who's really generally just doing stuff at the start of combat, or at the start of their day, or between combats, maybe, depending on what your feats are. This is very much feeling like your ideal gameplay changes. Your ideal round changes a lot more often than versus the inventor, who is generally just trying to impose its innovation as often and as effectively as possible. This feels much more like, changing between abilities and to suit the needs of the moment. My player is using the turret. That's the one that we've got the most experience with, and he has already used it as blocking terrain, to save an NPC, and just that alone is a really cool mechanic to it. So it's very different than the inventor, a lot more than I was worried that it would be, and I think that's probably why we don't have, at least at launch, maybe we will, maybe it'll get added, but I think that's why we don't have an armor power suit sort of subclass for it, because that might be a little too close to what the inventor does. The mine subclass feels something between the bomber alchemist and the recent runesmith playtest, in that you are constantly throwing out these AoEs and things like that, and really using a lot of battlefield control, but it looks to be a little bit maybe rote in what it does, versus the bomber, who is constantly changing damage types and everything to suit the needs. The mine expert does get some options like that, but definitely not to that same degree. Will that change as we get more varieties of feats and mines and equipment? Maybe, I don't know. We got a special stat block for their mines in this. I imagine we could see a lot more options for that for the base version. Or maybe they'll just stick to that and then rely on your feats and mods to adjust it. I don't really know yet. I think it's more interesting than the runesmith. It's less... The big problem with the runesmith, and this is not a video about the runesmith, but the big problem with the runesmith that we found was that it really felt like there wasn't a lot of incentive not to build the same runesmith over and over and over again. The few feats that were different on the couple of builds that my players looked at really didn't impact the overall playstyle of the character, and most of their choices of runes were still the same. They wanted that explosive one. I think there was an electric one that was very popular. But the two blast ones and then a couple of buff ones just seemed to be so much better. I really think the Runesmith would do well with subclasses that specialize in each type of... Not that cutting off the different ones, but you know what? It's not a Runesmith video. I'm sorry. So the mechanic works great. The tweaks that I would want to see there are pretty minimal. A lot of it sort of quality of life. Next up, we have the Technomancer. Now, the Technomancer uses Mastery of Magic and Technology to get more out of both. It's a 6 HP, 3-slot Intelligence key ability, Prepared Arcane Caster, and that's a lot of descriptors right there, but that's, you know, if you play these games, that'll make a lot of sense to you. It overclocks its tools for temporary bonuses and then can jailbreak spells to make them do things they normally don't. These are obviously cool, fun computer terms for the Starfinder caster class. But in effect, what they are temporary buffs and fancy meta magic. So I'll start by saying that the Technomancer feels much more in line with the Pathfinder balance for casters. The Mystic and the Witch Warper were very much... they had 4 slots and 8 HP, which I think is not a combo that should really happen. The Sorcerer and Wizard are 4-slot casters, and they both have 6 HP, and I kind of like that as a precedent. And if you're going to shift away from that, I think you should have a very good reason to it, design philosophy-wise. But that said, the biggest problem with it is I think having that high HP and having all those spell slots meant that there was less power budget for the classes to do their unique things. The Mystic with its pool of healing was great, but like it still felt pretty distinct. But the Witch Warper especially kind of just felt like it suffered from being too much of a caster and not enough of a Witch Warper, if that makes sense. And this is kind of makes sense because these are all of these classes. Starfinder, if you didn't know, Starfinder First Edition, I think they only had like half casters. You know, got to 6th rank instead of 9th rank spells. So having full casters in Starfinder is sort of uncharted territory. So it makes sense that there's, you know, some question about how best to balance that. And I think that I would like to see less HP and or less spell slots and more unique features. Luckily, the Technomancer with its 6 HP and its 3 slots has room for those cool features, and they pretty well deliver. On the surface, this is going to look like a sci-fi wizard, and it's not a sci-fi wizard. But I think in actual terms of gameplay, like... everything except combat, it's probably going to feel more wizardy. But I think in combat, you're going to find when you're using those focus spells for meta magic, the jailbreaks, and I think that that's going to really hammer home and feel closer to a psychic than a wizard, which is weird. It's also worth noting that when we were first doing our Pathfinder 2nd Edition coverage, I said, man, I really wish the wizard had used its focus spells for meta magic to make that be its special thing, and then maybe its school spells could have been like signature spells they can cast spontaneously on a whim instead of having to prepare them, you know. And I even said, like, I'd give up the extra slot for that. And that's pretty much what the Technomancer does, with the added extra thing of being able to temporarily buff its gear, its equipment. And in that way, it kind of feels a little bit gishy, especially the subclass that my player is playing, the DPS subclass, which kind of gives you a nice little buff to your weapon if you want to do that. So he can kind of, sort of, you know, if he's low on spell slots or doesn't have the right spell prepared, he's got this sort of fallback action with his gun, because wizards, everyone can use guns in Starfinder. So he's got this sort of fallback position that really works pretty well. And because of the spell cache feature, which allows the Technomancer to sort of play with its spell slots, reusing spells they've already used, swapping out prepared spell slots midday, that feels both very much like a substitution wizard and also feels very much like, you know, what I said with having spontaneous school spells. So obviously, it's kind of fulfilling a dream version of wizard that I wanted, so Technomancer looks very fun to me. My player seems to be having a good time, although he is definitely engaging more with the Starfinder setting than maybe playtesting the class as much as I would like, but we're having a good time, and, you know, we're learning enough, and I've actually got a psychic in the party to compare how they play, which is very interesting. I always try to do that. I don't want to steer my players into playing specific things, but I do kind of, you know, I do say, hey, it'd be really nice if we saw this to compare it to this in combat. And so having those, it really does sort of feel like I was correct, and it feels very psychic-y. So yeah, I'm pretty excited about it. I don't think there's a lot of need to adjust it. I think the power level is really good. There's been, it would have been very easy to make this thing overtuned, and I do think in a couple of feats it might get up close to that line. But overall, I think it's in a really good place, balance and mechanics wise. Having that 3 slots and that 6 HP goes a long way towards making me feel more comfortable when you've got those cool buff abilities. The only real complaint my player has had is that the action economy feels a little tight, which is a common enough criticism and concern for any caster, especially one with interesting and useful built-in third actions that Technomancer has. And so in that way, it feels a little bit like suffering from success, right? But it probably does warrant some action economy hacks or some adjustment to how some of those features work. There are some ways to get free action meta magic, which helps, but using that overclock ability can be a little taxing in combat, especially early on when a lot of your spells are shorter range. We're about to be playtesting level 12, which is probably about as far as we're going to get. We've been doing level jumps with the same characters, and I don't think we're going to have time to get above level 12, but I'm looking forward to seeing how that goes with the higher level slots and if that changes how that looks, because the fact is a low-level caster having a little bit of action, a low-level character, period, having a little bit of action economy worries isn't a problem as long as it resolves itself, after a while. So we'll see. I do think if they do make any adjustments to that, I hope that it is not as absurd as the Liturgist Animus absolutely broken leaping sustain feature. Hopefully they find something that is a little less over the top and exploitable than that solution. While the playtest is ending soon, on the 30th or the 31st, I believe, we do have about a week left to test the classes out and give feedback. As always with playtests, I encourage you, take part, even if you don't think that you're a master of the game and have a super strong understanding. Even if you feel a little intimidated, even if you don't have time to actually run games and do play tests with it, just reading through and giving your feedback. Does this seem exciting? Does this seem strong on a read? Does it seem weak? It really is useful, valuable feedback. So there may be a fly in here. It really is useful, valuable feedback, and I can't recommend it enough. It does so much good for the community and is just a really cool opportunity. A lot of publishers do all of their playtesting in-house or with very small groups of people at cons and things like that. The fact that we get to get hands-on early and give feedback for this stuff help shape this game that we enjoy, and that for me at least takes up a huge amount of my time and my brain workings. If I'm not playing, I'm thinking about it, I'm talking about hey, what about this cool feat? You see this new feat? So for me, having that opportunity to shape this thing that I really enjoy is just fantastic. And so don't pass it up. Like I said, even if you don't feel like an expert, you're going to be able to give feedback at least on how the impressions and things that you get reading through it, and that's valuable. If you're reading a book and you're looking at a class and you're thinking, this doesn't sound exciting, you're going to keep flipping to the next thing and not look at it. So even if all you're doing is saying, this didn't look good, I don't know how it plays, it didn't look cool, that's useful. We will have links in the description to download the files as well as to go and give your survey feedback. There's a standard survey that asks you to rate things on a scale of 1 to 10 and gives you a little bit of chance to give final thoughts. But if you have some really in-depth ideas that you want to share, there is a longer form essay style survey that you can fill out, and you can just go to town and tell them exactly what your thoughts are and what you think. And because sometimes you'll find that those scale of 1 to 10s on the standard survey don't really give and convey what you want to the feedback that you want to give back. So that's it. Have you gotten to play with these at all yet? Have you looked through them? Which class do you think looks cool? What adjustments would you make? How are you handling the weirdly worded animal companion things, the drone companion? One thing I do want to add about that drone companion is one of the options is a synthetic person, full-on replicant, if that's what you want to do, a machine that can fully pretend and pass, except under the most extreme scrutiny, as a sapient humanoid, not a robot machine, and can even get its own sort of AI to really be autonomous. It's a very cool thing, and something that I think a lot of folks have been wanting to have for a while. So it's very cool to see that. And the PaizoCon's happening right now as I'm filming this, and we got word that we might get humanoid cohorts like 1E, so humanoid companions that are not animals or machines or undead that you can command in battle in addition to troops rules, but again, different video. So that's it. Again, have you had a chance to play them? What do you think? What are you doing with your playtest? We're having a great time exploring genres and things like that. As I said earlier, it's been a lot of fun. And players that I have who thought maybe sci-fi wasn't for them, because we're able to try these different genres, they are starting to warm up to the idea of doing something a little longer term with sci-fi, as they're finding out, it doesn't have to be just Star Wars, it doesn't have to be just Star Trek, it can be all these other things. So even if you don't think sci-fi sounds super exciting to you, even if you don't necessarily plan to run a Starfinder-centric game, the fact that it's compatible, the fact that you can grab pieces and use them in Pathfinder and vice versa is very exciting to me. I think you can see my Havoc staff and my Skeletor. It's very hard, it's mirrored right over here. So I'm a huge Masters of the Universe fan, and Thundercats. A lot of, if you're an elder millennial or even a younger millennial, you probably have kids shows and cartoons and comics or video games where they mash up fantasy and sci-fi in really goofy, silly, fun ways. And so, you can have your barbarian with a laser sword like He-Man. And I think there's a lot of fun to be had there. So even if sci-fi isn't necessarily your lane, I encourage you to check this stuff out and consider what you could implement in your game. Just taking little bits and pieces here. So keep an eye out. We're going to be doing a lot of Starfinder coverage on the channel as it starts to launch, and we start to get our hands on everything for the final versions. So hopefully you'll come along with us for that, even if not your cup of tea. Give it a chance is all I'm saying. Thanks for watching. As always, we really appreciate it. Like, subscribe, all that stuff. It really does help us out and keeps us motivated to keep giving you content. Sorry for the hiatus. Life is life, and this was a very long hiatus, but we're hoping to be a little more consistent going forward and be able to get back into the community and into this hobby in a way that it really does. It makes us feel really good to connect with you guys and shared experiences for all this fun stuff. So thanks a lot for engaging with us. We really do appreciate it. See you next time. Bye.